Hi, everybody. I'm Natalie Brunell, and thanks so much for checking out my show where I get to hear from the leading voices in Bitcoin, financial markets, political structures, philosophy, and more. Please make sure that you subscribe to my page and like this video so more people see it and so that you don't miss out on any new content. This podcast does not provide financial advice. It is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This show wouldn't be possible without support from my sponsors. First and foremost, Swan Bitcoin. Swan is where I do all of my Bitcoin purchases, and I dollar cost average every single day with the lowest fees in the space. And I love Swan because it's a Bitcoin only company. Swan Studios produces my new show, Hard Money, covering the biggest news in Bitcoin and the global economy. It's like an orange pilled version of CNBC. So make sure to check that out on YouTube for all the biggest headlines because we are not afraid to question the mainstream narrative. And Swan is putting on the first and biggest West Coast Bitcoin only conference, Pacific Bitcoin. It'll be held November 10th and 11th in the LA area with prominent speakers like Lynn Alden and Preston Pish. I'm very excited to be the MC for the event alongside Peter McCormick and Stefan Livera. So if you want to get your ticket with 20% off, use the code HODL at pacificbitcoin.com. All right, it's time for the show. All right. Well, Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me. I've been wanting to have you on this show for a while, so thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you very much, Nat. It's great to be with you. I know you're doing a great job out there.
Thank you. I want to learn more about you. I was trying to read a little bit about your bio, and I read some really interesting personal things, including some CrossFit activities. So I want to ask about that, but I couldn't really tell where you're from. Are you from the East Coast? I know you went to school at Colgate, right?
I've been to school out here. Yeah, no, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My father was a shopkeeper, so I went east to school and just kind of stayed east. I've lived in New York, well, New Jersey, New York, Boston. I spent a year out in California, actually. It was kind of fun. So
yeah, Newport, right?
Yeah, I was in Newport Beach for a year. It was great.
Well, so tell me about your young life. Your dad was a shopkeeper. Were you, I mean, did you grow up knowing that you wanted to work in the field that you're in?
I really didn't. I was kind of lucky. I actually thought I was going to go back and work for my dad, keeping shop, so to speak. He had a furniture store, he had some other stores, and he was just a retailer, kind of a small businessman. My grandfather had started that business, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to come back and do that with you." And he said, "No, you really ought to try and do something better. You're too smart to do this." He was a smart guy. He gave me a book in 1972 called The Micro Millennium, which talked about how computers were going to be an important part of the future. And he said, if I were you, I'd go get involved in computers. And I always kind of had an engineering bent, and I thought, well, maybe I should go to engine school and learn about computers. And the microprocessor had kind of just been invented, and at a smaller level. I mean, the larger ones were being used by IBM and such. And but I wasn't, I didn't want to go to engine school. I wanted to go to a regular liberal arts school. So I did that. And I ended up studying economics, and I got very interested in business as a result of studying economics. And then I read some things on Warren Buffett and what he was doing investment-wise, and I figured it out. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I was always one of those kids who just enjoyed figuring stuff out. I'm kind of an analyst, and so we were taking apart lawnmower engines and anything that was mechanical, I'd take it apart and put it back together again, and I just kind of enjoyed that sort of stuff. So. I guess I kind of, now what I do is I take apart stocks and put them back together again, or I take apart the economy and put it back together again in my mind. So I really, my highest and best use, I think, is analyzing stuff. And so I went to college, studied economics, went to Wall Street for a couple of years and saw what that was all about, learned some things there, then went to business school. And in business school, I pretty much decided I'm going to be an investment manager because I like to figure shit out. And so, and that was where the micro millennium piece came in. In the back of my mind, my father was saying, "Hey, these computers are going to be an important thing." I was in business school from 81 to 83, and the Apple II had just came out, the IBM PC had just come out, and I thought, you know what? If I'm going to be an investor, I want to be investing in technology because that's where all the growth is going to be. And so I went and I wrote every venture cap, and I realized that venture capitalists were the guys who invested in technology. So I wrote every venture capitalist in the country a letter. I used the word processor at the business school I was at to send them out, and I got 390 rejections, and the 91st one was a yes. And I went to work for a bank in their venture capital group. And a guy named John Hines, who had actually backed Apple in the 1978 round, which was kind of fun. And so I started off in the venture capital business, and that one thing led to another, and I did that for a long time up until the early 2000s. I was, software and floppy disks and disk drives and graphic cards, and you name it. It was all a bunch of technical stuff. Novell, local area networking. And then I got really lucky. A guy gave me an internet business card in 1993. Gave me a card, said, send this to my internet address. I said, what the hell's an internet address? He said, well, it's this thing that connects all these computers. It's like Novell, but it works nationwide, worldwide. And I thought, I went back to my office. I told the guys who were working with me, I said, we got to find this internet thing and invest in it. And so we started buying private internet companies in 93 and 4. And of course, that worked out really well. And so by about the top of 2000, we could see it was a bubble. We were selling everything we could. And
Wow.
and so we'd ridden the internet bubble, and it did quite well. And I kind of semi-retired, and I was starting to coach my kids' sports teams and take time off. And then the GFC hit in 2008. And at that point, I realized I wasn't rich enough to retire, because I plan on living till I'm about 90 or so. And I looked at the amount of money I had, and I looked at the amount of inflation they were creating. And I said, oh, shit, I got to go back to work. So I started a fund focused on sound money and investing in gold and silver stocks. And of course, that was also when Bitcoin was invented. I didn't hear about it until 2011 or 12, and I didn't buy it until 2013. But it
Wow.
became, and is now, in my view, the leading form of sound money. But I haven't abandoned gold and silver either, because I've got a bunch of investors who are not ready for Bitcoin, or I'm dragging them into Bitcoin, I should say, kicking and screaming in some cases. But so I straddle both worlds, which is a little tough, because I've got Bitcoiners who hate gold and silver people, and I've got gold and silver people who hate Bitcoiners. I try and get them to be a happy family and stop fighting. We're all on the same team, trying to support sound money. So.
Wow, that is fascinating. There's a lot to unpack there. And it's interesting to hear you go from sort of tech and the very early stages of the internet to precious metals to now back to sort of a
Back
tech
to
version
tech.
of a
Yeah,
precious
yeah.
metal.
Yeah, precious metals are kind of ancient history sort of stuff, but they are sound money for 5,000
Mhm.
years. And I think partly that's what allowed me to pivot and understand Bitcoin so much. I mean, I can't tell you how much the Bitcoin revolution reminds me of the internet. I mean,
Right.
there were people in the early days of the internet saying, oh, this thing is bullshit. Who needs it? I mean, I actually remember in the venture capital business, one of the guys I worked with were kind of like, well, these PCs are nice, but other than word processing, what the hell are we
Right.
really going to do with these things?
Right.
And so any new technology comes along and people are skeptical, right? They're like, we don't, I don't see it. I just don't see
Yeah.
it. And so when I look at the internet, or when I look at Bitcoin, and I consider what happened, I mean, the parallels are just so similar. And so it's obvious to me that Bitcoin is going to become the dominant form of money. But I
I
think I'm
know.
helped by the fact that I saw how the internet evolved. So
I love seeing those articles that talked about the early internet, as this passing fad that's going to go
right,
away.
right,
And I
yeah,
was young watching the Today Show, and I idolized a lot of those broadcasters. And I remember that clip that I think went viral, semi recently, of them sitting around talking about how, what's the at symbol, what's the .com thing? Nobody's going to use this, and they're so skeptical. And now it's transformed their industry, everybody's industry. So it's just
yeah. Well,
it's
and Krugman thought it
fascinating.
was no more important than the fax machine, and yeah,
Exactly.
there's a lot of skepticism, and that's just the way things are. I mean, there's a lot change is a constant, and
Mhm.
technology is really, in so many ways, it's improved the world, because I mean, the internet. What I love about it is it's made the industry you were in.
Yeah.
It's taken away the power of the networks. I mean,
Mhm.
I love the fact that, and that things like your broadcast and Joe Rogan's broadcast can just punch through
Mhm.
these huge monolithic networks, and
Yeah.
you guys are telling the truth. People are going to listen to you, and they're going to just turn off the network news. It's great stuff.
Very, very true.
Yeah,
Well, before we get to sort of how you first discovered Bitcoin, I just want to take it a couple steps back, just because I'm always
sure.
curious about this. What's your like family heritage story? What nationality is there? An immigration story in there? Are you guys many generations here?
Yeah. No,
American.
I'm a really old Yankee. I've got two relatives who were on the Mayflower, and
Oh,
yeah, and it just kind of they came over. Most of them came over from England, Scotland, and migrated from Maine and Massachusetts to
wow.
Pennsylvania, upstate New York, Ohio, and then Michigan. And they were farmers actually in the earlier days. I mean, as so many
Wow.
people were. So um, pretty heavily religious. One strain was Mennonite, so on and so forth. My parents met at the University of Michigan. My mom's side of the family was from Maine. My dad's side of
Wow.
the family had been in Michigan since the 1820s. And they had migrated out there as farmers. One of the people on his side of the family was a founder of Hillsdale College, which I'm somewhat proud of because it's a very libertarian college.
Oh,
And I don't know, it's pretty plain vanilla, nothing exciting about it. We were very middle class to, I would say, perhaps upper middle class in Ann Arbor. I mean, by the standards of the coast, where people made tons and tons of money, the
hmm.
Midwest was a very kind of an egalitarian place,
Right.
and it was interesting too. The time and place where I grew up, Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan was kind of, or the Detroit, Michigan area was kind of like the Silicon Valley of its day, kind of post World War II. The auto industry really drove a lot of the growth in this country. I mean, the automobile and the
Yeah.
way that we went from zero automobiles per household in,
Yeah.
1910 to two or three by 1960 or 70, that all came out of Detroit.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of prosperity, a lot of positivity, a lot of optimism. We had won World War II. Vietnam was obviously a bad thing, but there were a lot of good things going on. And a lot of the people in the Michigan and Detroit area worked in the auto industry and did pretty well with it, frankly, back then. That was before Honda and Toyota and everybody else came in and started to displace, the U.S. manufacturers because
Yep.
the unions got greedy. But, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But the it was a good place to be. It was fun. I feel like I grew up in kind of an ideal setting.
Hmm. I know. Well, I've kind of touched on this before in some of my writing that we all have this nostalgia for the way we grew up, right? And one of the
Right.
things I remember you saying, I think it was on Preston Pish's podcast, is talking about how, back even just like a couple decades ago, people would be ashamed to ask for entitlements. They really took more
Absolutely.
pride in working hard, and there was this strong, vibrant middle class and manufacturing industry, and we've lost so much of that. And can you talk a little bit about just maybe the changes that you've seen throughout your life? Because now you have children, right? The middle class
Yep.
isn't what it was, and
No,
their
it's
opportunity isn't what it was. And
no,
why
it
is
certainly
that?
isn't. Yeah, it was, well, obviously, I think you know the answer. You know my answer to why isn't that? It's because we don't have sound money. But yeah, it's awful what's happened. I mean, so many things have disappeared, and it's not to say that it was perfect back then either. There've always been, problems in the world. There's always been corruption. There's always been, bad stuff going on. But I would submit to you that in '71, when we went off the gold standard, that really was kind of an earthquake in terms of the going in the wrong direction, because the gold standard kept things honest, and it kept people from it kept us away from the financialization, which has, in my opinion, really enriched a certain class of society and impoverished the balance of society. The working people have been badly hurt as a result of it. And you can see it because productivity, I mean, we all should be living much, much better lives than, in the 60s and 70s, you could, one person could support a family, and it wasn't as hard to get by as it is today. Now you need two people working, and you feel like you're always on a treadmill. And that wasn't so much the case, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and early 70s, before we went off the gold standard. So I think it's a very important distinction that we lost the connection to sound money. And, it's just gotten horrifically bad. I mean, all the offshoring and everything else that happened, it hollowed out the Midwest. You've got, the drug problems, we were talking the other night about the Sacklers and the whole fentanyl thing, and that terrible documentary Drug Sick, or Dope Sick, which documented, or was a documentary on what they did. And just a lot of things have gone the wrong way. The Vietnam War, and then the subsequent wars. A lot of things that are not, in my opinion, have been very bad for this country and very bad for the people of this country. And what I think is the saddest about it is, the powers that be, the people that run the show, both parties have managed to figure out how to get us all to fight, blue versus red, when
Mhm.
in reality the fight should be, everyday people versus the elites that have
Yeah.
constructed the system so that they get rich and they benefit off the wars and so on and so forth. And so,
Yeah.
obviously that's what Bitcoin does. I mean, Bitcoin is a spear that is pointed right at the heart of the fiat system, and we're going to kill it.
That's beautifully said.
It's a beautiful thing, right? I mean,
Well, so
and
tell me,
it needs to be killed, by the way.
I
So
I agree with you, obviously, wholeheartedly. So how did you first discover Bitcoin, and what helped you really understand it? Because that process is so different, and it can
yeah,
be very time consuming, right? We sort of get exposed to it, we're skeptical, we're curious, but it takes a while to really have that strong conviction and put a lot
absolutely,
of
and
money in it.
yeah, absolutely, and I think I heard about it in 08 or 09, but didn't pay any attention. I think in 11, I started hearing about it more, and I kept my eye on it, and it's a couple dollars a unit at the time. And then it started going higher, and I was like, there might be something here. And so I downloaded the white paper and I read about it. I thought, this is a pretty interesting experiment, but I don't know if it's going to work. And I didn't buy any. And actually, I probably would have bought some, but it was hard to buy it if you were around back then. Coinbase didn't exist. You had to actually go to a cafe and do paper wallet and give somebody some money, and they'd give you some coins. And so I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And then Mt. Gox popped up, and I got lucky. Unlike Caitlin, who lost a lot of coins at Mt. Gox, I was in the process of filling out the Mt. Gox paperwork when they failed. So if I had been any faster, I would have had a Mt. Gox account. I would have lost all my money in the Mt. Gox account.
Wow.
So I didn't buy it then, but I was intrigued. I'd read the white paper and I was intrigued, and I thought, well, this might work. It's an experiment. I should try it. Then Coinbase came along, as you know, and so when Coinbase got going, I think there was a run up into the 1,000 area, and I didn't buy it then, but it corrected into the 300 area. I said, that's it. And I went in and I bought a bunch of coins at $300.
Wow.
Yeah, which isn't, it's not that great. I mean, it wasn't that many. It wasn't they were whole coins, but it wasn't huge by today's standards of what I own. And so then I was in it. I started following it, and
how did you learn? Yeah, how did you learn? What were the resources you used?
On the web and various groups. I mean, one of the best things I did was I was lucky. There was some, one of the core developers groups was down at MIT here, and I'm in Boston or outside of Boston. So I went to a few of those meetings, and I learned a lot there. And my initial skepticism or issue was, this is a computer-driven thing. Is it going to break? I mean, we all had experience with your IBM PC goes blue screen. Mm-hmm. I thought, how can you have a money based on a computer? Computers fail. So the money's, it's just not going to work. And I didn't grok what a blockchain was. I didn't grok what hashing was. I didn't grok the way it was, it was cumulative, and that they could reset it and so on and so forth. So, it took me a while to work through this technology isn't going to work basic. And then I got into okay, if the technology works, are people going to really adopt it? And is the government going to kill it? And the government didn't kill it because it was small and it wasn't paying attention. And the adoption started growing, and just with every level of adoption growing, I got more into it. And then when we saw the ramp in 2017, when it broke out above a few thousand, started running, I started buying more of it. And I was a big buyer all the way up to the top in 2017 at 17,000. I was telling everybody, you got to buy this thing, you got to buy this thing. I'd been to a conference on it, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, it collapsed. And everyone said, why the hell did you tell me to buy that? And I said, well, don't sell it. Hang on.
A lot of people are feeling that way now.
Exactly, right. And then it went down to 10,000, and I doubled down. And then it went to 3,500, and I doubled down again. Wow. And I just kind of kept buying it. And so, there have been issues all along, but the more, as you know how it is, you go down that rabbit hole, the more you peel them away, the more comfortable you get, right? You understand it.
What was it in terms of your rabbit hole experience that essentially taught you or convinced you that no, even though it's digital, it can't break, and also it can't be banned? How did you get that?
Yeah, well, the timing, I mean, look, it still could break, right? I mean, I don't think that's ever been completely eliminated. I mean, I've now had enough conversations with enough core developers to think that they've got kind of fail safe so that it's very unlikely that it will break. And even if it did, the chain could be restarted and so on and so forth. So I'm not too worried about the breaking part now. It was more, that's kind of a time and time and space sort of thing. I mean, look, I've talked to people who were mining it and who had 10,000 coins and sold them at $3 a coin to buy a car. Do you know what I mean? I mean, and because even people who were involved with it knew it was an experiment and knew it could break, right? So the breaking part is just a function of talking to all those folks. The government part, I came to understand the self-sovereignty issue, and I mean, when I fully understood, there's so many pieces to it, right? You understand the difficulty adjustment, you understand BIP 39, you understand the self-sovereignty. You start to see, what they, and you realize that the government probably does want to kill this thing. I mean, hey, if I were the government running a fiat scam, I'd want to kill it. I'm sure there are people in the government that want to kill it, but they can't. That's the thing. And so we've invented a technology that they can't stop. So that's really kind of, that's not they invented a technology. We all have adopted it. that cannot be stopped. And so, those fears have kind of melted away with time. And now, I'm extremely certain that it's going to work. And, I think I've said in the past, I'll say it publicly, about half of my investment net worth is in Bitcoin. The other half is in my fund, which is a mixture of Bitcoin and gold and silver. And so, I've hedged my bet a little bit, and I've also got to, eat my own cooking with my fund, because all my investors are trusting me to do the right thing there. So, it's really been time and experience. And, that's why, I look at, 68,000 down to 17.5, and it just doesn't worry me. I know that we'll be at 100, 150, 200 within a few years. And I know that probably within 5 years, we'll be at 1 million. And within 10 or 15 years, we'll be at 5 or 10 million. So, as long as the way I look at it from a venture capital point of view, which the biggest thing when I was a venture capitalist that we always looked at was, are the dogs eating the food? In other words, is the adoption increasing? And what would give me concern about Bitcoin if suddenly the adoption started to not increase on a regular basis, right?
Right.
But, look at all the metrics. Just go look at any metric of hash power, addresses with a coin, people using it in Nigeria, people, the transactions on the Lightning Network. Any measure you want to use, it's growing.
Right.
And so, this is simple, folks. You've got a fixed supply and you've got a growing demand, right? What's going to happen, right? So,
let me ask you, because you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in terms of macro. So when it was going to that, 68, 69K range, you obviously knew the environment we were in, a ton of money printing, inflation starting to tick up. Did you see that as something that's going to wind down, or did you think that it was going to keep going past 100? Maybe that when it eventually falls, it'll, have a support level around 50K or so, or did you think like, oh, this might be a little bit of a bubble and this isn't a territory where I want to keep buying?
I have to say, this thing's a wild beast, and I really have no ability to predict its price. I'll tell you what I am good at as an investment guy. I look at pattern recognition, and patterns tend to repeat themselves. So I sensed it would go on a run, and then I sensed there would be a big correction, because that had happened 5 times before. That's not like some genius on my part. That's just pattern recognition, right? I'll tell you, it was very sad to me to see some people. I thought Plan B did a very big disservice to the Bitcoin community. Because what he did was he came in and he said, I've got this model, it's one model, and it says this is going to 150, no doubt, now, fast. And a lot of people, remember the stories of people who levered up and they bought a bunch of, they unleveraged, they bought a bunch of coins figuring it was 50, 40, whatever, and it's going to 150. And then it corrects and they got blown out. And when the whole Plan B thing was, all the buzz was going on, I was just like, guys, I don't know if that model's right. I don't know if it's wrong, but I don't think it's that easy. So I was a little bit skeptical, but I was buying some. What I do now, I continually DCA, shameless plug for Swan, because, I'm an investor and I love those guys. But, I just continually DCA at whatever price is available, because even 68 is going to seem cheap in 5 or 10 years. So I just buy some every week, a set amount. And, to me, it's, you can't know exactly what the price is. I will say this, I think it's particularly cheap right now. I also use this thing called the Meyer multiple, developed by Tip Meyer, who, he basically is looking at the price compared to the 200-day moving average. And he looks at all the data points from the inception. It has only been this cheap. Last time I checked, it has only been this cheap compared to the Meyer multiple 5% of the time. Which means on 95% of the days it's been out there, it's been more expensive than it is right now. So I think now is a pretty good time. If you're going to do a smash buy, I think 20,000 is a pretty good time. I also look at technical charts, and I could see it going down. If we get another March 2020 event where there's a correlation of 1 and everything gets liquidated, I could see it going down into the 14s. I think 14 is a hard bottom. I'm not worried about going below 14. Yeah. But honestly, I'm not sure it needs to go there. I'm not sure it will go there. I believe, it tends to go up between 5 and 10x on the run. So I think the next up move is 100 to 200. I like Max's 230 number. But honestly, when it gets to 200, I suspect it'll correct 60% off that. Now, 40% of 200 is 80 or something. So, so it comes back down to 40. And honestly, maybe when it gets to 60, 70, 80, 100, my DCAing, I'll lighten up a little bit for a while. I'll also look at, maybe gold or silver will seem cheap, or maybe something else will seem cheap. I mean, I'm always kind of weighing, all the assets that are out there and like, what's the best thing to buy right now in this environment?
All right, let's talk about Bitcoin 2023 and Bitcoin Amsterdam. Here's a look at Miami 2022, but Bitcoin Magazine and the team that brought you the world's largest Bitcoin conference is bringing the mission of hyper Bitcoinization global with the inaugural European gathering this fall. Bitcoin Amsterdam will take place on October 12th through the 14th at a beautiful venue in the heart of the city. Join thousands of Bitcoiners for 3 days of curated Bitcoin content that is relevant to the emerging Bitcoin scene in Europe and the global movement. Confirmed speakers include Dr. Adam Back, Alex Gladstein, Greg Foss, Ray Youssef, and many, many more. The European installment of Sound Money Fest will also take place on day 3 of the event, October 14th, and admission is included with GA and Will passes. And after Bitcoin Amsterdam, which I'm so excited to attend, is of course Bitcoin 2023. It's going to be held again in Miami next May, and you can head to b.tc/conference. Use the code HODL, HODL, for 10% off your tickets to both BTC 2023 and Bitcoin Amsterdam. I will see you there. And finally, I want to thank my partner, Fold. Fold is the best Bitcoin rewards debit card and shopping app in the world. You can earn Bitcoin on everything you purchase with Fold's Bitcoin Cashback debit card and win free Satoshis every day, or even a whole Bitcoin by spinning the daily wheel and purchase rewards wheels. Fold app is one of the best ways for someone completely new to Bitcoin to enter the space and start earning and learning. You can head to foldapp.com/Natalie for 5,000 sats when you sign up. All right, back to the show.
I mean, I'm always kind of weighing, all the assets that are out there and like, what's the best thing to buy right now in this environment?
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because Bitcoin has largely benefited from this QE environment that we've had for a long time that's coming to an end, right? And there are a lot of folks out there who say there's a new regime, essentially. The Fed is taking a much more aggressive stance. And it's really interesting to be on Bitcoin Twitter and then sort of just FinTwit in general, and people talking about something's going to break in the system that will force the Fed to pivot. It's almost like the street is waiting for that to happen, right? Because they're expecting the printer to go on again, but the Fed's like, no, that's not going to happen. We got to get inflation down. So how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's really the question of the day, and I'm preparing a speech for the New Orleans Gold Show that's going to address this. I also, on my Twitter feed, there's also a webinar that I recently gave for my investors on how we see this problem. So look, the Fed is losing it. I mean, we are in the end game of fiat money right now. I mean, they blew it. They completely blew it on transitory inflation. They printed way too much money. The inflation's running red hot, and they're scared. Okay, and they're starting. They're like a player in a game where they're losing, and they're starting to make stupid moves. Okay, and the move they're making right now is they're like, oh shit. I've said in the past, they're driving a clown car bouncing off the inflationary rail and the deflationary rail. Well, they hit the inflationary rail. It's like, oh shit, we've got massive inflation. We've got to slam on the brakes, just reestablish our credibility and get back in the middle of the road. And so that's what they've done. And as a result of that, there's no way they can pivot right now without a reason. Okay, they have to. In other words, look, on the next move, their credibility is going to be gone either way. But I think they'd prefer to have it be gone by, he said he wants to be Volcker. So he is going to hang on until something breaks. They're going to go 75 bips in November. They'll go another 75 after that. They don't give a shit. They've made it very, very clear, even if it trashes the world economy and all our partners, our trading partners, have serious problems like England just had and Japan and Italy had, that they don't care. They're going to keep pushing rates up. Here's what they do care about, though. They care about the continuity and the integrity of the financial markets, and they care about things working. And basically what we saw, England recently is a preview of what happened. I mean, the English gilt and the English, the Great British pound just traded like shit coins, or like a small developing country that was having a currency problem. And this is a G7 country, right? Yep. I mean, these things were down, the yield on the gilt was up enormously, quickly, and I could show you a chart of that. And the pound was down enormously quickly, and they had to come in with enormous QE and reverse all their policies. That's going to happen to the Fed, and it happened in March of 2020. Okay, and basically in March 2020, the U.S. bond market went no bid, and the U.S. bond market cannot go no bid, because if it does, that means they can't sell the bonds, and that means that there's not enough liquidity in the system for the government to pay its bills, and so they're going to wait until that happens, but that's almost certain to happen. It's a mathematical certainty. This is Foss's point. that if you think about it, we've got debt growing enormously, and we're in a debt spiral. This is Levish's point. We're in a debt spiral wherein interest rates are going up relentlessly because inflation is high and not coming down. And as interest rates go up relentlessly, the amount the government has to spend to pay interest on its $31 trillion worth of debt is going up. And if we were at, let's say interest rates go to 5%, pick a number. They're at 4 now. And most of the debt's within 3 or 4 years. The maturities are short. So if interest rates go to 5%, you multiply times 31, you're at $1.5 billion or $1.5 trillion plus of interest expenses. 2 years ago, the U.S. government interest expense was $300 billion a year. Now it's running at close to 6 or 7, and it's headed towards that $1.5 trillion. That's going to totally blow out the government budget in terms of deficits. Remember, those deficits get funded by issuing more debt. Issuing more debt into a market that doesn't want to buy it basically shoves the interest rate higher. So what I'm describing here is a doom loop, right? And Levish has described it very well as well. The interest rate goes higher, the deficit gets bigger, you got to issue more debt. Issuing more debt makes the interest rate go higher still, the deficit gets bigger still. And this is Hemingway's, suddenly and then all at once. And that was what was happening in England. And that's going to happen here. And in my speech at the New Orleans Gun Show, I'm going to lay that out. I mean, I am calling the shot. This is a Michael Burry moment. We are in the next 18 months, we are going to see the United States experience a full-fledged currency crisis. And when it does, the Fed is going to have to come back in. And they're going to have to say, damn the inflation, we're keeping these markets running. We will do whatever it takes. They'll do a Mario Draghi moment and say, we will do whatever it takes. And everyone will go, oh, I get it. They're going to print. They have to print. They don't have a choice. They don't like it. They don't want to have to do it. For all I know, Powell will resign or be fired when he does it, or they'll try and claim that they're saving the world, like the others in the past have done when they're doing it. But the fact of the matter is they will have to print. When that occurs, Natalie, what's going to happen is, and this is how I've studied all the hyperinflations in history, and this is in the past how it happens. When it becomes apparent to everybody that the Fed, you and I know the Fed is trapped, right? They've either got to print or the system's going to collapse. But we're in the minority of this country. I mean, you ask the average person on the street. I mean, heck, they'll pick a Hershey bar versus a bar of silver. I mean, we've all seen that video, right? I mean, but it's going to become apparent at some point in time in the future that they can't stop. They just can't stop. And once everybody knows that, it's all over. It's called Gresham's Law. The rush for sound money it's going to just blow people's minds. And gold's going to go through 5,000 or 10,000. Bitcoin's going to go to 100,000 on its way to 1 million. And the currency will fail. The United States currency will fail. That's my belief. We will have extremely high inflation, perhaps bordering on hyperinflation in the United States. Now, they will fight that with everything they can. They will do yield curve control. They will maybe force us into putting our 401ks into government bonds. They will probably cook the books some more. They'll continue to try and suppress the gold market as they've done. I wouldn't be surprised if they've started trying to suppress the Bitcoin market, in terms of paper Bitcoin. I mean, I think the BlackRock getting into Bitcoin, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if BlackRock was the first organization allowed to do a Bitcoin ETF instead of GBTC. And that in that ETF, BlackRock would be sucking up demand and then not ultimately buying the coins. I mean, I think there are all kinds of moves that the fiat world is going to make to try to keep itself intact so that they can continue their privilege. But I think the fact of the matter is that as events unfold, they're playing a losing hand and we're playing a winning hand. And so, they can talk as much as they want. The math and the facts are on our side. And so we're going to win.
So I totally agree with your premise. At the same time, I don't know if I agree on the timeline just because we seem to be so good at kicking the can down the road. And even when you think about this current sell-off and bear market, it has arguably been pretty orderly. Given the amount of debt in the system, it's been sliding down, but there are a lot of cracks, as Lynn Alden has pointed out and other analysts have pointed out, but it hasn't broken yet. And so do you see a scenario where, Jay Powell has said that he wants to get the interest rates above core inflation. And core inflation is still at what, 4.8 or something like that?
Yeah, it's a little higher than that, but yes, that area, right.
He wants to get it above. Is there a scenario where they keep hiking, and equities continue to take a hit. Unemployment maybe ticks up a little bit, but it's still rather strong given the current environment. And we're able to muddle through for a while with higher interest rates and higher inflation. Or when, like, how do you think that breakage is actually going to happen when right now it just seems like there's a rally every other week, then it comes back down, and
well,
it's
the
so
stock
volatile.
market's somewhat of a mystery to me. I don't dispute that. Look, I think the bond market is gonna break them. I think really the place to look is the bond market, and it's doing it really. I mean, look at the slope on the 2-year or the 4-year, the 10-year, whatever maturity you want to pick. I mean, the 30-year just hit a record high today. These markets, they move pretty quickly, and this has, to me, I think let's draw a parallel to the 2008 crisis.
Sure.
This is like 2008, and these crises, they tend to develop slowly and then they develop all at once, right? Or even the March 2020 thing. I mean, that was a much quicker, compressed version of it because it was driven by a worldwide shutdown, over the over the flu, but which is stupid. But in the 2008 crisis, it was similar. It was more U.S. focused, obviously focused on real estate, and it started. I mean, I could see it. We could all see it in the summer of 08, 07 when the first couple of funds that were involved in the CDSs blew up. And, and so it took from that time till, October of 2008, that was, over a year worth of time. But we're already seeing the blowups, and things are starting to become kind of fugoid in their motion. I mean, go look at, and I'll have this in my presentation in New Orleans, go look at the chart of lumber, go look at the price of the lumber. I mean, it's up, it's down. I mean, these are really, really extreme moves. And nobody's ever seen moves like in these markets like we're having right now. And I actually compare what's going on right now. Our stuff's not working that well. I mean, to me, this is just like the water getting drawn out before the tsunami comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's and England foreshadowed it. I mean, it can happen fast, Natalie. It really can. And so look, I can't promise that I'm right, and the timing nobody knows. But I feel like in an 18-month window, I feel like it's 100% certainty. In a 2, 6, 10-month window, it might be shorter, but I don't know. Things are happening pretty quickly now. And some of the best analysts around. I mean, I really respect Luke Gromen. I think he's got a fabulous model in the way of looking at this. I mean, he says it's shit's breaking. It's breaking fast. It's breaking now. And I mean, look at the CDS on Credit Suisse. Look at UBS. I mean, these are big organizations. There's tons of derivatives tied to these interest rates and these currencies. I mean, eventually things are going to start to fail, and they think they've got their finger in the holes in all the dike, but there are lots of holes, and more of them keep springing up. And once in financial markets, once you get contagion, it's like he who panics first panics best, right? And they all, people will move, and they will move with authority, because they're just trying to protect themselves. I mean, and we're talking about a lot of wealth, and we're talking about, the game we're playing here is for all the marbles, right? I mean, we really are playing a game for all the marbles. And so yeah, the other side is gonna, they're gonna pull, they're going to continue to do things. I mean, the LME cancels the nickel contract when the shorts are screwed in the nickel. I mean, they will try to break the rules, change the rules, screw us, extend it, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that the events will keep coming at them quickly. And, the math is relentless. It's just absolutely relentless. So, I mean, think about what will happen here is, and, the U.S. housing market is turning down. Think of, employment is still strong, but that's because everyone's working 3 jobs to pay for the higher cost of living. But that's all going to change. It's all going to change. And, the government deficit this past year is understated because we had huge capital gains in 2021 as a result of the stock markets being strong. Well, the stock market's down this year, big time. So those are going away. We're in my opinion, we are going into an amazingly large shitstorm in the next 12 months. And you're either going to be in the right place or you're not. And if you're holding stocks, just regular run-of-the-mill stocks, I think you're gonna regret that. I think if you're holding a version of sound money, or stocks that are tied to sound money, you're gonna be very well served for having done that. I think it's as I said, it's a Michael Burry moment to me. It's the most asymmetric trade I've seen in 45 years of doing this. And part of my speech in New Orleans is going to be is, we're really lucky bastards that we understand this.
Yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't feel very good right now because of the recency bias of the last year or so of 68 to 20. But we're about to, I mean, it's going to feel completely different in about a year when Bitcoin's at 100,000 and gold's at 3,000.
We got to hear this speech that you keep referring to. You better post it.
Well, I haven't delivered it yet, and I'm still working on it. But
okay.
and Brian will be kind. He'll you can watch it online if you sign up for it. His show, which is great, the New Orleans Gold Conference, or he usually releases it a couple weeks after the conference for free to anybody to see it. So I gave a speech last year, but that was different. It was more about the moral case for sound money. So.
Got it. Okay. Well, let me ask you something, because the last round of QE, or the last cycle we had, it funneled a ton of money into the growth stocks, the dream stocks, right? Where basically companies could get a ton of funding and financing with cheap debt, and you didn't have to even have revenue for years. You didn't have to prove that you were profitable at all. It wasn't a big deal. We were like fueling this equities bubble that we created. And we also had cheap labor, and we had cheap energy. And now all of that is shifting. Correct. So Lynn Alden wrote in her last newsletter something really interesting about these cycles of, growth to value when commodities are strong versus equities and sort of these other areas of investment. And so she seems to be pinpointing that we're moving into a commodities cycle. Commodities are going to be stronger. So when something breaks in the system, the money printer has to kick in. Where does that money go? Is it going to send the S&P to 6,000? Is it going to now move into commodities, oil, gold? Like what happens when the money printer kicks in? And do you see, like, some people predict that the balance sheet's now going to expand? I mean, enormously. We thought the money printing was unprecedented before. Now we're going to get, tens of potentially $20 trillion. What does that look like when the printer goes burr again?
Great questions. I mean, Lynn's brilliant. I take her newsletter. I really have a lot of respect for her. And she's right. In my opinion, we are entering a commodity cycle. We hit peak deflation in March of 2020. And now we are in an inflationary commodity cycle, and we don't have enough of everything. And obviously Russia took advantage of that and said, hey, our commodity is your problem, right? So and we've underinvested in these things. As you pointed out earlier, you had this huge bubble in all these meme stocks, all this other stuff. I mean, Cathie Woods and ARK, they look like geniuses until they didn't, and all this stuff, was fueled by free money, and now it's blown apart. And so we've underinvested in these commodities, and what we're going to see, I think, is that the prices of these things are going to continually go up. And so the companies that are able to deliver commodities are going to go up in terms of value and price as well. And, to the degree that capitalism and price discovery still works, and it doesn't, completely because of the manipulation on the other side, we are going to see when money printer goes burr, again, as I said, Bitcoin's going to 100,000, gold's going to 3,000, oil's probably going to 150. And, there's going to be a massive inflation. And therefore, in a commodity cycle, the stocks that will work will be commodity driven stocks, oil and gas stocks, copper stocks, gold stocks, aluminum stocks, and other commodities as well, just agricultural. I mean, I think what's going to happen, I mean, that I kind of see us having some sort of a hybrid between an inflationary depression wherein, everything we own goes down in value and everything we need goes up in cost. And so, that's the problem with the Fed, right? They can print the money, but they can't determine where it goes. And the money tends to chase recent performance. And so, that's why, I mean, by the way, that's how Bitcoin got to 68,000, because, as you'll recall, in 2020, it broke out from the 510 area and it went to 50. And every central bank in the world said, we got a real frigging problem here. And every speculator in the world said, this is great, 10 to 50. Oh my God, I got to get in on that. And they bought 50 and drove it to 68. And then, then the tide slightly shifted and everyone said, these central banks might get more responsible. And, there was a time we thought the government was going to run $2 or $3 trillion deficits for a couple more years, but they actually stopped. And so the deficit came down, tax revenues went up from the stocks, and everyone said, we got a little too far ahead of ourselves. We got out over our skis. I mean, there's a chart I posted on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen, everyone's seen it. It's my friend Dan Oliver's chart on the the Weimar mark and how much it shows a red zigzag line of the monthly moves in gold in the Weimar marks. And these currency events are very volatile.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it very difficult as an investor. I mean, it's kind of like, we're in this fugoid up and down, and it's no fun. I mean, there's no doubt it's no fun. It's very easy. If you bought it at 68 and it's gone to 20, you can immediately say, oh, this sucks. I made a mistake. No, you didn't. You happen to buy at a cyclical peak, and when it's at 150, you're going to feel great. And and by the way, you should be averaging down at 20, just like those of us who bought it at 17 in 2017 did, right? I mean, that's the concept. So in my mind, when the money printer goes burr again, it's going to go into sound money investments, because it's going to, again, hyperinflation occurs when a majority of the people realize that the government can never stop printing the underlying currency. That's it. That's all it takes. And the Fed has really set themselves up to totally lose their credibility all the way through. Sven Hendrik did a great job of talking about this.
Yes.
The next Fed pivot will be the last. The Fed's done. They're finished. I mean, the Fed is basically finished. They don't know it yet, but they are. They were kind of finished when they, printed as much as they did and said inflation was transitory and it got away from them. So now they're reacting the other way, going too strong on we're going to tighten it down and we will never pivot again, and we're going to bring inflation back down to 2%, which they'll never do. And they're saying they've got it all under control, and they don't. And then what will happen next is something will break, as I've described. The debt cyclone will cause something to break. Principally, I believe it'll be the U.S. bond market. And at that point in time, they will have to pivot. And then everyone will say, holy shit, these people have no clue what they're doing and they can't stop printing. And
why didn't the bond market say that after 2020 or after the great, I mean, why are we so good at kicking the can down the road?
Well, it takes time. I mean, Preston does a great job looking. Think of each of these monetary moves as like a contraction in terms of giving birth.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Right. And so the baby, you don't just have the first contraction and the baby pops out, right? You got to have a bunch of them. So think of 2008 was the first. 2008 was when labor started, and they actually managed to put it back in the can,
or 2000,
yeah, or even 2000 to a degree, particularly 2008, and they created another bubble at a higher level. They created the everything bubble. I mean, 08 was really the housing bubble. The 2000, the bubble we're in now is the everything bubble. But
sovereign debt,
sovereign debt. We can't do the intergalactic bubble from Mars. So there's nobody to save them. I mean, they're now at the level where these currencies are at risk because there's no coming back from the expansion of a credit thing, as von Mises said. I mean, the only question is, do you stop and let it collapse, or do you print and have inflation? And so what they did in 2020, in March of 2020, is they went to the printer. Right. And, they managed to avert the crisis, but that led to the inflation. Right. And now the inflation's out of control. And they're trying to avert that crisis by, jacking rates up as fast as they've done ever in their history. But in turn, what they're seeing is that, England's blowing up, Japan's blowing up, Italy's blowing up, and they're soon going to see the housing market's going to blow up, and then the economy is going to blow up. I mean, pretty much everything's going to go to zero if they don't stop. And so, including their bond market, by the way. And that's the big tell. I mean, this is the thing a lot of people aren't focusing on. Think about it. I mean, if the Fed is tightening and the economy is going to slow the economy down, in some sense, the bond market ought to be the safe haven bid, and yet it's not. And what that tells you is that people are starting to doubt the creditworthiness of the issuer, right? And so that doubt is only going to grow. And these things take time,
right?
But I think the next pivot will probably be the last, because I think with the next pivot, people will realize they can never stop. And at that point in time, think of the Gresham's law effect of $3,000 gold and $150,000 Bitcoin. I mean, everybody, and the stock market down another 20 or 30%, or even just the stock market flat and bonds down another 20 or 30%, and inflation running at 15%. So the price of gasoline is now $8 or $9.
Well, so I was going to ask you that, like, what does inflation look like in that environment when they're printing again? Because a lot of people are saying they do expect double-digit inflation, but what does that look like for the, American life? Because people are getting frustrated and they're looking for a new politician, right, to solve the problem.
Yeah, well, certainly, hopefully, it doesn't look the way it, looked in Germany. I mean, in the 20s and 30s, but Look, I don't know. I mean, nobody can predict. I mean, what I'm hoping is that somebody in the political world emerges that understands that the problem. I mean, the issue we're facing is the fourth turning, right? The issue we're facing is the money's bad, the money's broken, and we need political leadership that realizes that that's the problem. And that's why it's so gratifying to me to see you getting on things like Fox and other places. We've got to get our message into the mainstream. So the mainstream they don't even know what the issue is
They
yet.
don't get it. Yeah, it's
I mean,
sad.
they're all fighting blue versus red. I mean,
Exactly.
that's a bunch of noise. That has nothing to do with what the fundamental problem is. The fundamental problem is the money is broken. So,
Yeah.
hopefully, what will happen is a Bitcoiner or some Bitcoiners or sound money people will move into the political spectrum and will catch a real, catch a real bid, so to speak,
Yeah.
or get some real traffic, traction in terms of explaining this problem, so that we move back to, we need a currency reset based on sound money. And
Yep.
we need to go to a sound money standard.
Completely.
And
Are you familiar with Ayn Rand's writings?
oh, absolutely. Yeah, I read all this
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. So last night, the event that I was at, it was honoring Michael Saylor actually and
I
his
saw that. Yeah.
contributions, and just so many quotes, from the speech on money, and talking about how this it all seems to be coming true. It's like when destroyers appear among men, they destroy the money first, and just
Yeah.
what happens when you break society down and people basically are in power due to favors, not actual productive
Yep.
activity. And really, truly,
Yeah.
it's that base layer that's been
Well,
completely
Francisco's
corrupted and needs.
Francisco's money speech is a
Yes,
classic, and I read it in college, and
yes,
I've been quoting it for years. And what's
so true.
fabulous to me as a 65-year-old is to see all these young smart people like yourself, and Marty and Jack and all the other people in Bitcoin, becoming Austrian economists, right? I mean, saved
Yeah.
to the world an enormous favor by educating the millennial generation
Oh, yeah.
about things that us old gold farts have been, we've been talking about this stuff for years, and we were just like alone in the wilderness, like, okay, Grandpa, yeah, enough. I've heard enough. My wife always says to me, please stop talking about gold. We need friends in this town. And, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but don't you realize the currency is going to die? And she's like, yeah, okay, fine, but meanwhile, I want to have a social life. So,
Well, it's really interesting to just game out, how this is all going to play out, because you're absolutely right. Most people don't even understand what the problem is. They're
right.
looking for a hero in their red or blue team, where, obviously we know that that's not where the hero lies. But I think that this does provide an environment that provides a fertile ground for someone who is very dangerous to come into power, because people are scared and people just want someone to say that their problems are going to be solved. And I think that's why it's appealing when someone comes out and says, I'm going to send you a check, I'm going to send you money, I'm going to fix
Oh,
this, when really
absolutely.
that's creating more of the problem. And
Well,
so
or they try and demonize one side or
yeah,
the other side. I mean, look, I grew up, the country I grew up in, the place I grew up. I mean, most people are pretty good people. I mean,
I
it's
know.
they don't want to kill people in North Vietnam. They don't want to go to war. They just want to live their lives in a fair and honest system. I mean, the problem we've run into is that we've let unfair and dishonest people get control of the system, and it's causing the rest of us to suffer.
I
And
know.
so, we've really, we've got to, I mean, and the only way we can solve this is through education. And so people say,
So
well, what
true.
can I do? And, I mean, it's what you're doing. And that's why I'm so proud of, what you're doing and the whole, the professionalism with which you've done it. And that is to say that we've got to get out there and tell the story, because, this has to be more than just a fringe movement. It's got to become a
Right.
semi-mass movement. And,
Right.
we don't have to have a majority, but we got to have a really loud minority that
For sure.
understands that sound money is the issue.
Right.
And so, people say, what can I do? I say, give people Safe's book,
Yeah.
direct them to Austrian economic reading. I mean, explain
Right.
to them what's going on, because, it's going to happen. And sadly, there's going to be a lot of pain. And,
I know.
it's
I,
all
I
we can
always
do is try to help people through it. Right.
I know I've been thinking a lot about that, and I ask people, just what does this transition look like? Because we want it to be peaceful, but the truth is that we have concentrated power to such a level where it's crazy to think that really the elites by number is not that big. I mean,
Right.
we individually are maybe powerless, but together we can bring them down if we really wanted to. But we're so fragmented and divided because the majority of people don't understand what the problem is, right? So it's like, how do you unite them when really this does cut through red and blue? This cuts through to like the core of just the individual integrity of a human being able to work and being able to earn an honest living to take care of their family and plan the future, right? Everybody wants that.
Absolutely.
And we deserve that. And we don't get it.
Absolutely. And we've got more technology, and there's so many great things that have happened in the world. As I say, I mean, given the technology and the progress we've made, we should all be working 20-hour weeks and living better than our parents did or our grandparents
100%.
did. And in fact, we're all slaving away because the system's broken, and there's so much leakage, into these elite pools, and the governments are they've pursued so many bad policies. I mean, setting interest rates causes capital to go to the wrong areas.
Yes.
And as a result of that, it costs all of us. We're all poorer as a result of this broken system that we live in. We would all be much richer. Our lives would be much, much richer if we had sound money. There's just no doubt about that. And they'd be much fairer too.
Agree.
I mean, there's so many things that fiat corrupts. But again, it's not, our job as people who understand that is to try and convince our fellow citizens that that's the case. And all we can really do is talk about it and spread the word. And the good news is the word is spreading. I mean, there are more and more followers of people in the sound money community on, on Twitter. You're getting on some of the mainstream programs, which is fabulous. I saw, so the bottom line is, we got to get out there. We got to get the word out there. That's right.
Right. Okay. Well, as we start to wrap up, I'm just kind of curious. I want to challenge your prediction and just ask you, you said that the next QE will be the last, but what if it's not? Give me the scenario where it's not, where the music keeps on playing.
Look, I could be wrong. I mean, just to, full disclosure for your audience, right? I thought it was all over in 2008. So, and I was dead ass wrong, right? I mean, they managed to pull it together and extend it a long time. So, certainly this is not financial advice. Everyone make your own bets. I mean, this is what I believe, and I believe it strongly, but I'm not always right, and I'm the first to admit that. Look, they could pull it back together, and
how?
Well, what they should do, two things they could do. One, they could get the U.S. government spending under control. They could cut back on the military expenses, get out of all the meddling all over the world. Means test Social Security and Medicare. Basically in a very aggressive manner, try to balance the budget. Okay. If they did that, that would help their cause and prevent, the collapse of the dollar that I see is coming. But I look at the politicians we have in office right now. I don't think that's a very high probability. They could also do a reset, some sort of a monetary reset, similar to what Roosevelt
debt jubilee
did. Yeah, debt jubilee, or a old dollar, new dollar. They might try this with a CBDC, which I think will fail miserably, but some people might buy it because, particularly if they're going to get universal basic income via a CBDC, there's some segment of the population that'd be, that's great. The government's giving me money. Sure. Love it. Right. So they could do that. They could force us. They could lock the exits. They could try and make Bitcoin illegal. They could try and tax the hell out of Bitcoin and gold. They could force our IRAs and 401ks and force us to buy government bonds. I mean, they could say this is like World War II, and you've got to support your country by buying our debt. There are a lot of things they could do. There are a lot of directions they could try, and some of those might forestall the collapse. I don't know.
Interesting.
I think there's a possibility that they'll skate through this one, but honestly, I don't rate the probability of it as being very high. Because of the size and magnitude of the fugoid motions that are taking place. I mean, we're heavily into the contraction. I mean, this baby's coming out. It is. I mean, this baby's going to get born, and I don't think there's a lot they can do to stop it. Now, labor might be longer than I thought, but we're in labor right now, and the baby's going to get born.
It's fascinating.
That's how I see it.
Well, this has been such a pleasure. I just want to hear a little bit, CrossFit. I just want to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit. So you're quite young and you're healthy and in good shape. One of the things that happens as you age, I'm 65. one of the things that happens as you age is that, you just start to slowly, in your 30s, it's no big deal. In your 40s, it's a little more of a big deal. By the time you hit your 50s, you start to realize that things just don't work as well. It just kind of everything, your mobility, your strength, your endurance, you name it, it just doesn't work as well. And that happened to me in my 50s. And I was like, this really stinks. I don't like this at all. I got to figure out how to solve it. And so I read a book called Younger Next Year by a brilliant guy who was a doctor in New York who was in the process of dying. His doctor basically said to him, "Hey, dude, if you don't clean up your lifestyle, you're going to die in 5 years." And so he went into kind of a radical fitness program that improved his life, and he's still alive now. His name is Chris Crowley, and he's 80 and he's super fit. And the book changed my life, made me realize that I had to clean up my act, or I was going to be, like a lot of other 16, 17, 80-year-olds, which is you really don't have to lose your strength and mobility as you age, but you have to work out aggressively to prevent yourself from doing so. So once I read this book, then I started studying how do you get in shape. And I read some books by a guy who's a Navy SEAL named Mark Devine, who wrote a book called Unbeatable Mind. And basically, because he'd gone to the college I went to, and basically what he determined is that the elite way, the most elite way to stay fit is CrossFit. And it was developed by some guys who'd come out of the special forces in the Navy. And they more or less, it's a very high intense, it's high intensity interval training. And
very intense.
Yeah, very intense. And the notion is that basically by pushing yourself to the limit for very short periods of time, you're triggering all the hormones that you really would have been triggering when you were 20 years old. And so you can delay the aging process. And so it's quite a hard way of working out, but it's quite an efficient way of working out. And it really slows down the aging process on a lot of metrics, body fat, cardiovascular, there are all these different measures, and it's all about measurement. So, it's not for everybody, and you've got to be careful, because if you overdo it, you can hurt yourself. But if you're well coached and you're careful, there is no way to get fitter, in my opinion.
Wow.
And so I just noticed as on my calendar this month that I'm coming up on my 8th year anniversary of doing CrossFit. And I do it 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes 5. And
good for you. That's great.
I do it at 6 a.m, which is the only time, because if the day goes by, you lose it. And the bottom line is that what it does is it keeps you feeling young. I mean, I feel younger and stronger now than when I was 50, and I can lift more than when I was 50. I'm a little slower running than when I was 50. But
do you do the carnivore thing too? Are you on that?
Yeah. I mean, the carnivore diet is, I mean, I'm not all about meat. I try and do a lot of plants as well. But yeah, I mean, it all fits together, right? I mean, a very good diet. I mean, look, I want to be around to see my grandkids, benefiting from having, granddad having invested in Bitcoin. And as a result, I want to be as healthy as I can for as long as I can. And the Younger Next Year book really opened my eyes to, he did a lot of studies on the issues surrounding aging. And we don't need to age. I mean, we all see people who are 40 years old, they look like they're 70. And we all know people who are 70 years old, they're fitness freaks, and they look like they're 40. And so that's what I want to be. I want to be the 70-year-old that can perform like a 40-year-old. So.
That's awesome. I really admire that. And I think it's really also cool how within the Bitcoin community, there is not just this movement towards sound money, but also sound body, sound mind, like really just pushing yourself and being a little bit more skeptical of what we're told about what's healthy, what we should be eating, what we should be doing, and challenging those views. Because now, we're going in the direction of not, just eating bugs and this type of body is healthy when it's really clearly not. So I love that about you.
Working out is really it's a form of proof of work, right? I mean, there is no shortcut, and it's highly recommended. I recommend CrossFit to everybody. I'll tell you, if the whole world did CrossFit, we wouldn't have the healthcare problems that we have. Not even anything close to it.
For sure. So. And I also read that you're a pilot. Are you?
Yeah, I'm not current, but I used to be a pilot. My father was a pilot, not commercial. Well, he was commercial in the end, but I grew up with him flying, and I was flying with him. And so, yeah, I've had a bunch of planes and fly. I love to fly. It's really a beautiful thing.
Amazing.
But unfortunately, I haven't been flying for many years now, probably 7 or 8 years now, because when the gold market fell apart from 2011 to 2015, my net worth took a serious dive. And as anyone who flies and flies privately knows, it's a very expensive hobby.
Yes.
So I had to stop flying for a while. I've still got a nice airplane. It's sitting in a hangar, and I've just gotten to the point where I'm going to get it current, and I'm going to probably get current and start flying again. But
Yeah, you should. Well, when Bitcoin moons, you can be
well,
flying
exactly. When
everywhere.
Bitcoin moons, for sure. What I don't want to do is I don't want to get into a plane ahead of my skill level, because a lot of
Yes.
guys do that and then they end up crashing. So
100%. Wait, so if Bitcoin goes in the direction that we all expect it to go, is there a point where you're going to say, I'm moving away from the precious metals, or would you always
yeah.
see that as a hedge?
No, I think I probably will. I think I probably will. I mean, I've said, and gold guys hate me for this, but I've said ultimately Bitcoin wins. Bitcoin will flip gold. I mean, I'm with Saylor on this. I just disagree on the timing.
Got it.
And part of the reason why I continue to support gold is I'm really anti-fiat money. And you can't get you can't get all old people to buy Bitcoin. Some people get it, but what I see, and so in my client base, I've got a lot of people who want to protect themselves from inflation, but they're afraid of Bitcoin.
Sure.
And so I drag them into gold, and then I try and convince them that Bitcoin's an even better solution than gold. But I think they're both going to work. I think Bitcoin's going to work better. But there are some people. I mean, when you're 70 or 80 years old, do you really want to? I mean, you can't be 100% in an asset that could have a 60% drawdown. I mean, that could freak you out, right?
Yeah.
And gold, by comparison, the biggest annual drawdown on gold has been like 25%. So, and how much risk you take is a function of your age. I mean, you're in your 20s and 30s, you should be 100% Bitcoin. Screw gold. You don't need it. Right? Your whole generation, why would you want to have gold? But if you're 75 years old and, you want to make sure that you have as much money the next year as you had the year before, I mean, you don't want to see your account go down 70% because all your money was in Bitcoin and be kind of like, holy shit, I lost a lot of money there, and your time frame is a much shorter time frame. So it goes with time preference, right?
It's interesting also the lessons you learn throughout this process, because there's also something to be said about, starting with altcoins, thinking that they're, one of them's going to moon and take off, when really, if you had just put that money into Bitcoin, you'd be so much better off. But it was the slower turtle, that was going to win the race.
We all did that.
We've all learned.
I must say there was a time when I thought Ethereum was worth owning, and I owned a little bit. I confess.
Me too.
But I figured it out, and I was like, nope, bad monetary policy. I'm not there anymore.
Yeah. All right. Final thoughts before we leave you.
What, from me?
Yeah. Any final remarks, thoughts? We're awaiting more. I mean, someone from the Fed talks every single day, right? It's like they don't just have the meeting; they talk every single week. Everyone's looking at these markets. Just any final thoughts to leave us with?
I don't know. Look, if you're in the sound money community, be of good cheer, be strong, and be optimistic. Right? I mean, it's been hard. Gold hasn't worked for a couple of years. Bitcoin hasn't worked for a couple of years. A lot of my investors said, "Hey, why aren't we doing better right now?" And I just say, you got to take a multi-year time frame here. I've been doing this for 45 years. I'm highly confident that we're right. I'm super confident that within 2 years we're going to feel fantastic. And so, I guess my final comment would just be, be at peace with yourself. Know that if you understand this stuff. I mean, part of my speech is going to be, we are all lucky bastards. I mean, we have no idea how lucky we are. We are about to be rewarded in an enormous way, and people can't see it. And so, be of good cheer. Just, take care of yourself, work out, eat well, love your family, be nice to other people, and save and sound money, and we will win. I mean, Marty Bent's got it right. In the long run, we will win. And the long run's coming really quickly, Natalie. I mean, it's not going to take that long. It's happening right now. I mean, this baby's coming out. This new money baby is coming out. It's coming out soon. So that would be my comment.
That is a great place to leave this conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you as always. Take care, Natalie.